Yeah, I think it's going. It is on. Hi, I'm Mario, the Artisan Rogue. So today I went to Bernstein Rein. If you guys haven't heard of them, they are a design and marketing firm here in Kansas City with a really wonderful history of having worked with a lot of different things. Their founder, Bob Bernstein, is, if you can Wikipedia this, he's responsible for creating the McDonald's Happy Meal. Not so much the concept, I guess, but well, you know what? There's some weird things on the internet about whether or not he did or did not. And from what I'm understanding, McDonald's officially says he did, so we're going to run with that. I had a chance to go to a meeting that was helping out the West End Connection, where we're trying to work on new affordable housing for artists and things like that. For any of you that have never been to some place like that, it's kind of weird because I work at Hallmark contractually. Many of you know this. And it's a little bit of a trip because, even going into someplace like Bernstein Rein or like Barclay Creative or something like that, there's always a similar sort of, I don't know really how to put it into words. It's like they all seem to have a similar sort of beat and function to them. Like when you go into these places, you go, oh, this seems somewhat familiar. There was a little bit more of a creative hutch feel to Bernstein Rein compared to like when you walk into Hallmark, depending on what floor you're going in, there's a very distinctly corporate avenue to everything, but it's still fairly creative. It's a little more loose than most places you would work. It's certainly not like an H&R Block or something like that. And it was nice talking and getting back into that sort of feel. Was this big boardroom that we were all sitting in. So we all took turns, kind of organically explaining what we were about and what we were doing and why we believed in this. At the same time, we were bouncing back and forth with inquiries from the four people that were there. It was 5 people total from Bernstein Rein. One of them was a former Hallmarker, and I'll get to that here in a second. It was really cool because, as you can see here, we got a chance to see Bob Bernstein's office, which was incredibly cool. It's really kind of weird because it struck me as being not too dissimilar. I kept saying like this is kind of a look into Bob Bernstein's head. And I thought that was really funny because I often think that about my own studio here. But seeing this guy's office was like this explosion of high-end artwork. I mean, there was some crazy stuff in there. He had an original Musha on the back wall. He had some animation cells on the floor that were just sitting on the floor in frames, but they were from, it looks like the Flintstones. And then I can't remember the other one right off the bat. It's in the photo right here. There was a few things like that were really cool. There was this sculpture of these different monitors, these older monitors in the shape of a robot. A lot of really cool things like that. It was really, really cool to see all of that stuff. And I love seeing things like that because, you hear about all of this stuff, whenever especially when I was in high school and even into college, you hear about a lot of these design firms and what they stand for and what they are and what they've done and what they've created. Like Barclay is famous for having created Sonic commercials, like with the 2 guys in the car, talking or bickering or kind of, taking the Mickey out of each other. That stuff is what they're known for. And so it's interesting to go into those places and kind of see the environments. This is, Barclay, just like Bernstein Rein and Hallmark, they all have something of a Midwestern flair. I mean, they're based here in Kansas City. So when you go into these places, there's certainly that Midwest corporate sort of feel to it. It's not New York. It's not LA. It's not Chicago. Which even though Chicago is Midwest, this has a distinctly heartland sort of feel to it. And I can't really explain it, but after all that was done, and I swear to God, there's so many times that and you know what, it's just going to happen because it's Kansas City. Of course, there's a lot of ex-Hallmarkers here. The conversation kind of shifted over to the fact that, because we all had to tell a little bit about our backgrounds, and I said I had worked contract for Hallmark, and it shifted a little bit to the fact that today, President's Day, was the first of 2 days where they were going to be letting go of about 250 to 270 people or so, which, yeah, that's pretty terrible. And I wish I could mince words on this, and I really can't, but I'm choosing to really not say too much about it. The fact of the matter is, in these sort of circumstances, it's a corporate decision. It's that overall health of the company going. It's not to say that they're treating anyone disrespectfully or badly or anything that I'm aware of, or although this sounds kind of harsh, that would even really affect me very much. Hallmark isn't that kind of place, but it's still one of those weird things where you hate to see people lose their jobs, or worse than that, sit on the edge of their seats waiting over the course of a weekend to come back on Monday and Tuesday and see if they have an email or if they have to go talk to HR. Worse yet, figure out what the hell they're going to do next. And so that weighed kind of heavy. And that was, of course, sitting in my mind as I'm sitting in there. At some point in time, companies will begin to kind of realize what they really truly have in their workforces. But that's a whole nother video, a whole nother discussion I could get into, and something that I don't really feel like touching much upon. I know I can say this much. It took me years to really realize a lot about working in corporate America. When I was younger, I really wanted to work for Hallmark because everybody else wanted me to. And I had the opportunity to meet some Hallmarkers and visit Hallmark when I was in high school and see some stuff. There's a whole bunch of history there. Just about everyone that's creative has kind of, been tempted to look in the direction of Hallmark or other things like that. It's funny because even a buddy of mine, Chris, he was saying that he took a tour to Hallmark when he was, I believe, in high school, and he was like, I'll never work there. And I always think about that sort of thing because I only got in there because I knew people each and every single time. I mean, I had applied directly with a resume, all this other stuff, but it's true. In the creative circles, unless you know somebody, you probably aren't going to get into the big places like Hallmark or even beyond that, Disney, Pixar, Lucasfilm, working for Marvel. You're just not going to. I would love to think the talent and that sort of thing would carry you through, but such is not the case. And even more importantly, it's not going to hold you over in the event they want to make their stock portfolios better or they want to give people raises higher up in the echelon of leadership. That's not bad-mouthing any company. That's not putting anything out there that isn't blatantly obvious to anyone that, has a pulse. It doesn't really affect me because I'm contract. And a lot of this I'm putting out there right now, just in case anyone's wondering why I'm being so transparent about this, is because I've had many people ask me about this, and I made a decision that I was going to try and be as transparent as I could be with how a lot of this stuff works. So when you're contract in these circumstances, you're really not affected unless the people that you reported to or they had workflow pipelines that kind of meshed with yours are let go. Well, then you got to wait for some kind of reassignment, the handing off of the torch or whatever, and then you just kind of go on and do your job. And in a lot of these circumstances, it's fairly painless when you're contract because unless you're let go or your entire division just goes away or something, who knows? It's just kind of a luck of the draw, roll of the dice, that sort of thing. In this circumstance, it's hitting creative, which I'm not a part of. I work in IT. Because of that, there could be some fallout that comes down in my area. And that's not to say that in 6 months they wouldn't let people go in my area. That's just how companies are and what ends up happening with that sort of thing. I'm hoping that, I've got at least 7 to 10 people right now, many of them really good friends, that I'm hoping beyond hope aren't let go. That's a horrible thing to hope for because the truth is that somebody has to be let go. You don't walk into somewhere and not immediately notice almost 300 people gone. And there have been layoffs prior to this. At some point in time, no matter how many times you've rearranged cubicles and put people back together, you do start to notice it. I'm only hoping that morale and other things like that don't start to go down with it. But such is the reality if you work in a corporate job. So anyone that, and I'm just being as real and honest as I possibly can be on this, for any of you still in school, high school, college, or switching careers looking to get into something like this, this is a reality that's growing. We were always somewhat expendable, but now it's more so. Companies in general, and not just Hallmark, companies in general, they want to move more toward, well, I'll hire you on contractually and I'll pay you more, okay? I will pay you more to work so that way I don't have to hire you on permanently. And I'm always a little remiss on this. And it's weird. You get this conditioning over the years that you don't want to say what you earn or anything else like that. I make pretty good money at Hallmark. My average on an hourly basis, I believe right now, is just under $40 an hour. That allows me to be able to, and still somewhat make ends meet. It's worse if you're full-time. And Hallmark is one of those companies that for a long time paid people very, very well. Some of them that easily make up in the higher, 5-figure area, much, much more than I do. I can't imagine what that's like to suddenly be cut loose and try and figure out where else you're going to fit in the creative community and what else you can do. That is almost impossible to do when you're doing, like if you try and do, artwork for comics, you're working on your own time and then hoping you're going to publish this thing and make something of it. Any one of those things become a huge challenge for you. And for the people that have been there 10 plus years, that's a huge rearrange of what the hell you're actually doing. There's been parts of me that have wondered, like, what would I do if I hadn't gotten this contractual work? Because I get freelance work here and there. And but the market right now is pretty weird and pretty tight. I'll be completely frank. I don't market myself as well as I should. I'm working on that so that I can make a bigger dent in being able to afford more things like my bills this year and pay off my student loans and stuff. And I can only imagine what that's like whenever you've got a family and all this other stuff that you've built upon the legacy of having worked a career at a place like Hallmark or any one of these other places that suddenly, because of the bottom line or because they want to make more money, they let you go. I'm not faulting the companies. It's a business decision. I don't believe for a second it has anything to do with emotion. In fact, I've been through this, so I know it has nothing to do with emotion. And I didn't get mad when I got fired the first time. I know I've been through this before, but when I was let go from Hallmark, they shut down where I was. There was 4 or 5 of us creatively. There's 4 of us. The manager was gone that day. Her manager was gone. And they just called us back into a room, explained to us that there were new positions opening up in Lawrence. It was weird because they locked the door. And I remember sitting there thinking to myself, like, what is going on? And I looked over at a friend of mine who was sitting next to me, and he was definitely not happy. Nobody in that room was really happy because we knew what was going down. And for months we've been told, no, your job is fine. No, you're just going to be doing sort of a guidance sort of like role for these other people that you're training, which was always weird to me. We kept getting lulled into this weird sense of security because we were being told, well, your jobs are just getting easier because you're going to instruct these other people on how to do your job. And we ended up losing our job. I was internally angry, but at the exact same time, there was a weird sense of like this, I can't really explain it. I can't say it was relief. It was like this weird quasi feeling of like, what the hell do I do now? I got the rest of the day off. Like really, I guess it hadn't hit me yet. And so then, but before I left, I ran across a couple of other people who had been let go and some stuff like that. And it was just a weird feeling. And I've spoken to other Hallmarkers before, like when they've been let go, many that had worked there far longer than I had. And some of them reacted fairly calmly. Some were furious. But the weird part was that because of the fact that you end up in a zone where you're kind of specialized on what you do and your knowledge base, you're still somewhat valuable to the company. So they'll use an internal marketing and recruiting arm to bring you back into the fold, which is great. And I can't complain about that because I didn't really know how I was going to parlay a lot of what I had learned over those years into anything else because it really doesn't work in any other environment. And that in so much that other design companies in Kansas City know this. I've done client work for them where they're like, oh, well, you came from Hallmark. We don't work that way. They didn't mean it in a disseminating or a bad way. They just were like, that's just not how we do things. You end up stuck in a situation where you're making pretty good money. And especially after you got let go, you end up making better money than when you were salaried, which is so messed up in my head. But I understand that they're trying to pay you a fair wage. And so that way you can hopefully afford to pay for health insurance or anything else that might occur because they don't provide it for you. It's not your contract. It's all there is to it. If you're only working so many hours a week, then you struggle to kind of balance all that out and figure out what you're going to do depending on what your financial situation is. Everyone's is different. Mine wasn't so great. It has definitely been an odd couple of days for me. Last week, I got so stressed out, and I'm not even joking on this. It was last week that I went to the doctor, and for weeks prior to that, I was so stressed out. And so let me back up here a bit. I had been having severe neck pains. I've been having a pain in this hand, elbow, lower back, upper back, neck, a couple of other places, just in general. And I kept thinking, okay, this is going back to when I did security, some altercations, fights, things like that had happened, or when I skateboarded, injuries I did back then, but it didn't feel like those injuries. It wasn't the bone, it wasn't the muscle, it wasn't the tendon. It just felt like it was in there. It was like just under the connective tissue or tendons. Very odd. On one of the days was Thursday. I'd completely spaced. Thank goodness that I have my calendar on my phone. And I realized, oh my God, I've got a freaking doctor's appointment. I went to it and I had a chance to talk to him about it and everything. And it was one of those circumstances where I love my doctor. He was listening to me and everything else like that. And he goes, okay, yeah, all right, good. All right, okay, so that hurts. Okay, this sort of thing. Okay. He told me that it sounded like I had aspects of, I'd always heard this term, but I didn't understand what it was, fibromyalgia. Now, there's some of you probably rolling your eyes, some of you that are like going, oh, I know what that is. I really didn't know or understand much of what that was. From what I was told and what I gather, it is not a physical pain in so much that you cannot treat it with necessarily inflammation or pain pills as effectively as you could a real injury. It is something that is brought upon by a mental aspect. To some degree, it seemed like it was manifested mentally. He certainly wasn't discounting it. Quite to the contrary, he told me about when he worked and he had trained with some doctors in a fibro unit and how they had spoken to him about how there are no labs you really run on it. There isn't anything you can do about it because it doesn't exist in a true treatable form that they had anything for. In fact, the only factors that they could treat would be giving antidepressants. I think he mentioned Zoloft and some stuff like that. If people wanted it, pain medication, but that really that was more of a placebo effect. It could help, but it really didn't dull the pain if it was super severe, or you felt down, or you felt tired, or all of these other things. But it was one of those self-capitulating things where it just built upon itself. I was really confused. That was something I didn't think I was going to have to deal with, because I, number one, hadn't really heard of it, but that doesn't mean anything. And number two, I'd always heard that, if it did occur, it still had some other underlying medical issue with it. So much for WebDM. Should never check out that website. Nonetheless, he goes through this whole thing, and he said, you definitely want to focus on at least minimum 7 hours of sleep a night, good REM. You want to go through at least 6 to 7 cycles of REM sleep. What are you depressed about? And I was telling him, well, there's these huge let goes that are happening at Hallmark. Financial stuff for me has been a little tight, trying to be able to afford shows, finding more freelance work, even having the gumption to get up and go, to want to draw, to do things, it's been fairly non-existent for me. And I went through this whole thing with him, and it was actually really such a watershed moment for me because, and I don't know if I brought this up in another video or not, I had been going to counseling for a while to deal with depression and other stuff like that. And out of the blue, the guy that I had been seeing was let go. I don't know why. Nobody answered any questions. And this was one that was based on income. So thankfully, I don't know how thankful I am about that, but I didn't register high enough on the income base that they were charging me for it. So thankfully, the program had been set up to help me out on this. Now, if I started making more money, then I had to be honest and let them know, and then I certainly would have started paying them. But in this circumstance, there were enough grants to cover what I needed. But the counselor I had was let go, so I didn't really have an outlet for it, to talk about this to. So it was weird. It turned into my medical doctor being this for me. And he certainly helped me through some of it, 45 minutes I had in the doctor's appointment. One thing led to another, and we were able to figure all this out. Now, no joke, no kidding, I followed what he said. And he did prescribe some sleeping aids, which I have yet to go pick up. But I was like, you know what, let me see how I can work through this. Like, okay, I'm going to stop eating so late. I'm going to stop drinking caffeine so late, drink more water, switch up my pillow, get a new pillow, anything I could think of, to the point of using a foam roller to stretch out on, any number of things. Also trying to not get on Facebook as much. There's this thing on my phone, and I didn't even realize this, but evidently, what is it called? Screen time. Have you guys even heard of this? Like, it's called screen time. And that old adage that most people don't even utilize, like 60% of their phone. I'm old enough now that I'm starting to think that way about my phone. Anyway, it breaks down like what you do with it. Like, I have 1 hour and 39 minutes today on entertainment, and then an hour and 36 minutes on social networks. It breaks it all down for you. I'd use trackers like that for other things and managing my time. This one really struck me because then I wondered, okay, well, what have I been doing? And it turns out most of the time when I'm on Facebook, if I'm not happy and looking at cat pictures or dog pictures, then I'm mad about political posts. And I thought, okay, well, then what's causing that there? It turns out because I have been taking no pain medicine since the appointment, and I have been sleeping better. I also stopped doing a lot of this stuff, and I tried to jump and push back into my own work. The severe neck pain I was feeling has gone away. I had pain so bad, guys, that I was staying up late at night, sitting there, just pain ricocheting up and down my neck. to the point of being, my stomach was hurting. I was nauseous. I didn't want to eat. I just sat and I would just sleep off and on for 3 hours a night. And sometimes have to get up and go to work, or just sit either here in the studio or upstairs, wherever, and just be miserable, in pain, angry. And I didn't want to do kidney damage to myself. I was taking, 3 or 4 Excedrin, a ton of Advil, all this other stuff. And I really started getting worried. I'm like, okay, this cannot be good for me. Then I was worried about other stuff like my food intake and all this other stuff. And being a type 2 diabetic, kind of jacks you up. You've got to watch what you're eating and that sort of thing. And I'm not great about that. With all that being said, I was able to just clear my mind. I started doing some stuff I started organizing the back half of the studio finally. And I also started doing some of the little hobby-like things and trying to think of, I started doing these little exercises for 5-10 minutes where I was thinking about the things that I was grateful for or that were good. Even though there's all these bad things that happen, I'm very much one of those people that believes that you can have all these bad things that are happening, and it's going to happen. That's life. But at the exact same time, you can go back and look at the good things that have already happened in life for you. I mean, there's tons of that sort of stuff that I could go back and look at. And I'm not trying to brag. That's not a humble brag. I'm thinking, just simple things like having had dinner with my parents the other day, being able to, have just held my cat who wanted to sit in my lap for 30 minutes, and I got nothing done but a transference of fur from her to my shirt. That kind of stuff, those little small things all add up to really happy things. I tried to focus on all that, and surprisingly, within a day or two, so much of it started to clear up. I'm happy about that. I'm beginning to realize just how much stress had really been wearing down on me. And a lot of you probably already know this and understand that I was just a little bit behind the clock on that. Thankfully, the good thing has been that, it allowed me to kind of get back into the workflow. And my buddy Ben brought me on board to do a couple of spot illustrations I was working on. 2 of them have been completed. It's these 2 right here. And then I've got 2 more in the works. And a few other little accent bits of work, some ships I have to send him. And this is for a game of his that I'll tell you guys more about later once he's got it going and everything else like that. I'm really looking forward to it. I love working for him. He runs Brass Engines, and if you haven't checked out his stuff, I know I've spoken about his stuff before. He did one of the creative interviews. He is distinctly one of the best and interesting people I've ever known. He's a hell of a game designer. He's such a fun guy when it comes to a lot of the game mechanics and stuff he wants to work on. And the rest of his friends and family are just as interesting and caring and genuinely unique people that you'd ever want to know. So, and it just, I'm so glad to have all of them in my life, and they're really cool people. But I'm really looking forward to that game. According to my notes here, let me see here. Oh, this is fun. So, talking business again. This is, speaking of Ben, that's somebody who would probably have a heart attack if he hears what I have to say next. I had forgotten to pay some sales tax on a show I did in Kansas last year, NakaCon, and I owed that money. And of course, I can't do the current show in 2020 until that stuff gets paid. And it takes, even though they'll take my money immediately, it takes a few weeks for it to process through. So to say I'm sweating it right now is an understatement, but I'm hoping everything's going to work out. Still a couple weeks till NakaCon, so we'll see how that goes. But that's never fun, and I am horrible about that sort of thing. And that's one of the things as a professional, you've got to keep your ducks in a row. I say that, and there's people like in artist alley groups and stuff that are way better at this than me. They're like half my age, and it's so depressing. Yeah, so that's basically been it. I've been really enjoying doing these sort of things. These posts have been really cathartic. I'm really happy that, I have this avenue to be able to put this stuff out there. And something else that, this is on a complete sort of side note, but related to this. For a long time, I got really stressed out. I'm like, oh God, I got to grow my YouTube channel. I've got to make more of a presence for myself on Twitter and these other social media things. And it suddenly hit me the other day that as long as I keep creating and I'm just doing this sort of thing, I'm not going to ask people to click on the subscribe, ring the bell, that sort of thing. I kind of in a meta way just did that, but I really am. What I'm saying is that's not what I'm ever going to ask on any further videos. It was getting to me to do that. It's bad enough that I've got to remarket a lot of my own artwork out there continually so I can make sure people see it. But trying to do a call for action like that isn't what I want. If you guys like what I do, then share it, then like it and subscribe. That's cool. But I figure you guys are smart enough to figure that out on your own and decide for yourself. I don't have to sit here like a cheesy car salesman and ask you guys to do that. So thanks again for watching, guys. I sincerely appreciate it. Hopefully I will see everyone out at NakaCon. I am absolutely beside myself that I let this sort of thing happen. And I have a few new pieces that I have planned. I haven't created them yet. Hoping to show them to you by this next vlog that I do of some other artwork that I'm going to be bringing out to NakaCon. I'm really pretty excited about that. This is also going to mark the biggest display I've done for NakaCon, which means I added a wall. Ta-da! It just means you'll be able to see more of my stuff hanging up, and this is one of the few shows I can get away with that. The table is rather long. It's only about 18 inches deep. But the fact that it's got like pipe and drape all around there, and I can actually go crazy with my walls and my extra extension for my sign and all this other stuff, I'm super stoked and excited. I'm really hoping that I didn't totally jack things up and that I can do NakaCon this year. Anyway, thanks for watching, guys. I will see you in the next video.